Coming up today on the Nick Craig Show, a brand new story out of the Netherlands describes a woman leaving the United States trying to claim asylum overseas because of awful, terrible, evil Donald Trump. We'll have the hilarious details coming up. And a good Monday morning to you. Welcome into the Nick Craig Show, streaming live this morning on YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook. Don't forget that you can take the program with you 24/7 on demand in your favorite podcast app. It is totally free to do so. Real easy. Just search for the Nick Craig Show in your favorite podcast app. You can also listen online by visiting the website nickcraig.com. Our program this morning brought to you by the Law Group here in Wilmington. For any legal questions or challenges, lawgroupnc.com, or you can give them a call, 910-251-6088. Over the last decade, we have seen a variety of different stories highlighting how individuals, in large part due to Donald J. Trump, when he was the 45th, now 47th president of the United States, felt the need to flee the country. We've seen a lot of celebrities do this. Makes sense. Most of them have the financial meaning, the financial means to not fully divorce themselves from the United States, but have the ability to go abroad to purchase property, or maybe they have already owned said property. Was it Rosie O'Donnell currently is over somewhere in Germany or something like that? And so we've seen a couple of these higher profile individuals that have said, oh, I have to leave the United States. Donald Trump is awful. The Republicans are terrible. You know, the very predictable stuff that we've heard now for the better part of 10 years. And that is one group of individuals. There's another group, however, that are not celebrities. There's another group of people that do not have the financial means to leave the United States. Many of them barely affording to live in the U.S. that have tried to escape the nation. Now, here's a dirty little secret that unfortunately most people, definitely those on the political left, don't understand. You can't just show up into another country. We've seen some stories like this as well, where people go over somewhere over in Europe, just show up at a random country and then get turned away and say, oh my God. Yeah, it turns out like literally every nation, unless you're in some weird third world dictatorship, has some level of immigration. You can't just show up into a country without having some sort of travel visa or work visa or some sort of special exemption or something. You can't just show up. Many of these individuals, of course, believe that the United States has this incredibly oppressive immigration process that requires individuals to go through a long, strenuous process to go into the United States. And lo and behold, many countries throughout Europe have a similar process. You can't just show up at the front door of these countries, knock and say, hi, I'd like to live in your country now. That's not how the process works. And so we've seen a couple of stories like that as well. I caught this, what really can only be described as pathetic story over the weekend. Here's the headline. Trans woman begs to return to the United States after fleeing Trump's America to be placed in a notorious Islamic asylum center in the Netherlands, telling the Daily Mail, quote, I will be hurt or killed. Now, let me state this very clearly. I am not in favor of this transgender woman being injured or killed in the Netherlands. I am not joking about that. I'm not laughing about that. The ironic part of the story is that she claims she fled the United States, or he, we'll get to some of the details. This person claims that they had to leave the United States because the Trump administration, similar to what you've heard from many of these other screwballs, is erasing trans people, right? You've heard this phrase before. I'm being erased by the administration. No idea what that means. No idea how that is happening. If you ask any of these individuals to give you an example of how the administration is, quote unquote, erasing you, which I would describe as if you're being erased by somebody, you're being killed. I mean, let's be perfectly honest about this. If I was to say that somebody's out there erasing you, trying to remove you, then you're no longer here. You're gone. You're probably dead. That has not happened. This administration is not killing trans individuals. This administration is not rounding up trans individuals and throwing them in prison. None of that is happening. And that's why it's so absurd, and why I think so much of the political left has lost any sort of credibility, right? Because you come out and you make these insane statements like the Trump administration is erasing trans people. Any normal person goes, what the hell are you talking about? And then they go, oh, well, yeah, I no longer can have my fake identity printed on my passport. Therefore, I'm being erased by the administration. And any normal, sane person rolls their eyes and goes, all right, whatever. It's not real. It's a total manifestation. It's total bogus. And so while I don't think it's funny that this woman thinks that she's going to be hurt or killed in the Netherlands, but I will admit it's hilarious that she left the United States because she's obviously insane, obviously so wrapped up in left-wing politics, and has no understanding how the rest of the world works. That's the funny, and really maybe not even funny, but sad and miserable part of this story. So let's get into some of the details over at the Daily Mail of all publications. A transgender woman who fled the United States seeking asylum, this is important, seeking asylum in the Netherlands, now fears that she could be hurt or killed after the notorious refugee camp she was placed in became so dangerous that the Red Cross has pulled out its aid workers. The name of this camp is known as Terra Appel, I believe that's how it's pronounced. It is the Netherlands' largest refugee camp and is home to about 2,000 asylum seekers from across the globe. For years, it has sheltered people fleeing war and persecution, including Somalians and Syrians who say it remains too dangerous to return home despite the fall of al-Assad. Now a new wave has begun. Transgender Americans who say they fled the United States fearing for their safety after Donald Trump returned to the White House. I just mentioned a minute ago that this word asylum is key, and it is, right? As I mentioned at the open, we've seen celebrities or other high-profile individuals who some have followed through, some have not, that claim that they were going to leave the United States. Those individuals, as I mentioned, have the financial means to go through the process, and they obviously have the connections to go through the process of getting some sort of temporary status in some of these countries that they are quote-unquote fleeing to. And most of them have the ability, if they don't already own some sort of property over there, to live. Right, that is one thing. You're like, oh, I'm fleeing the United States. You're very well off. You're very wealthy. You're very well connected. And you have the ability to purchase some lavish property somewhere over in Europe. That's one thing. This woman is seeking asylum in another country. Seeking asylum, meaning that she has to make the point, make the case in the eyes of the Netherlands government that she is being prosecuted or persecuted and is fleeing some sort of horrific situation in the United States of America. And contrary to what this transgender woman believes, that's not the case. The United States is not committing any sort of war crimes or persecutions against trans individuals. Now, they can claim this, and they do claim this because they're so caught up in their in large part, their mental illness, but it's not actually happening, right? There's no evidence. No other nation across the globe is looking at the United States right now and saying, wow, can you believe that the United States is locking up trans individuals? Can you believe that the United States is persecuting these individuals? Why aren't they responding like that? Because it's literally not happening. It is a complete manifestation of these individuals. They are so wrapped up in their politics. They are so wrapped up in their out of control left-wing nonsense that they genuinely have have gotten themselves in a position where they believe that it is too dangerous to be in the United States of America. And I'm here to tell you that that is a totally insane thought, and nobody believes that. Nobody believes that. The rest of the world rolls their eyes and laughs and goes, "What the hell are you talking about?" That is totally and completely insane. We are continuing with a story that I saw over the weekend over at the Daily Mail with this pretty absurd headline. Trans woman begs to return to the United States after fleeing Trump's America to be placed in a notorious Islamic asylum center in the Netherlands, where she now feels that she will be hurt or killed. So the individual at the center of the discussion here is asylum seeker Jane Mitchell Ark, ARC. She is 48 years old, from California, left the United States after she, who was originally a man, said it became increasingly volatile for transgender people in the U.S. This is what I was just mentioning in the last segment. What does that mean? What has happened in the United States over the last decade that has made it volatile for trans people to exist? And this is one of the things, again, that they always say. This administration, or Republicans as a whole, they're erasing us. They're making it impossible for us to exist. It's quite the contrary. That's not happening in the United States. It hasn't happened in the United States. Now, I think all of this transgender stuff is total BS and total nonsense, but we also live in a free country. And so if you want to walk around and pretend to be a different sex or a different gender, that's your prerogative. Now, there are certain things that you're not going to be able to do. Like, for example, and we'll get into this in the story, if you're a dude, you're not going to be able to go into a women's bathroom. You're not going to be able to play in female sports if you're not a female. You can't just wake up one day, decide that you want to be a different sex or a different gender, and then have afforded you the ability to play in female sports. That's not going to be the case. And the vast majority of the American people agree with this. This is like an 80-20 or a 90-10 issue. It's really not that controversial. But because these transgender individuals believe that they are being discriminated against because they can't show up as a dude and participate in female sports, they somehow correlate that with being erased, being removed from society. No, not at all. You can play men's sports. You're not barred from playing on any sort of sports team. You just can't play in a female sports team or a female sports match unless you're an actual female. That's what it is. If you're a trans woman and you want to play in men's sports, you can. Turns out many of them don't. Surprise, surprise. Ark, a software engineer from San Francisco, says she has faced abuse on the streets, not in San Francisco, let's be perfectly honest about this, and while using women's restrooms, and decided to flee the United States after a harrowing incident in which she feared being run over by a truck. I am sorry, but I do not for 1 second believe that this trans woman walking through the streets of San Francisco, of all places, was getting abused on the street. I mean, seriously. San Francisco is arguably the most progressive leftist place in the United States of America. I mean, it is one of the most out of control cities in this country, where you have got just insanity roaming and walking the streets. And so I don't believe that happened for a second. Now, this question over using a women's restroom, that I totally see being the case. And that's been a legitimate discussion that has taken place, and one that absolutely should, in fact, be taking place. Because it is totally insane for you to believe that you can just wake up one day, claim to be a different gender, and go into a women's or men's bathroom, more particularly a women's bathroom, with not only adult women, but potentially young girls. As a man, that's what we're talking about here. This whole thing is what we're covering and talking about. You don't wake up one day as a dude and say, hi, now I'm a woman. Now I can go into a women's bathroom. Now I can go play female sports. That's not how it works. Now, again, you have the ability to make those decisions yourself. If you want to be and describe yourself as trans, have at it. I also have the free decision, and so does the rest of the country, not to placate some of this stuff. And that's what we've seen with this debate over bathrooms. That's what we've seen with this debate over sports, right? And this is something that I think is often lost. This is a very important point. Something that is often lost here in the United States. People say, oh, well, I have the freedom to do this. I'm in America. You're absolutely right. You do. But guess what? Other individuals also have that same freedom. They have the ability to think what they want. They have the ability to act the way that they want. And just because you have decided that you're going to no longer recognize how you were born, that doesn't mean that I lose any sort of opinion or thoughts or rights in my life. That's not how that works, right? This ability for you to pretend to be a different gender, that only extends so far. Once you start infringing on other people's rights, once you start infringing on the safety that a female feels in a locker room or in a bathroom, the decision and the discussion has completely changed, because it's no longer you just quote unquote living your life. You're now affecting other people. You're now affecting other entities, right? Your quote unquote rights have now infringed on others. And that's where the debate is. And that's where the big break is with so many of these individuals. Back to the article. So we've got this 48-year-old trans software engineer from San Francisco that was abused on the streets and was, I guess, harassed in a women's restroom because, of course, she's a man. But Ter Apel, the asylum camp in the Netherlands, has been grappling with a surge of violence outside the asylum center, including stabbings and violent brawls, prompting aid groups like the Red Cross and their volunteers to temporarily halt their work supporting refugees over safety concerns for their volunteers. Once again, according to the individual here, Jane Michelle Ark, she told an outlet called Pow News, the situation I have in the United States as a trans person, not good, right? But here I will be hurt or killed. What is not good right now in the United States? That you can't play on a female sports team? That you don't get to go into a public restroom that could have potentially young girls in it? That's the rights that are not good enough for you? I mean, that's what you're arguing over, going into a bathroom? It's totally insane. Since May the 20th, the Central Agency for the Reciprocation of Asylum Seekers, known as the COA, has limited access, allowing only vulnerable asylum seekers, such as women and children, inside. So, of course, right there, the transgender thing, oh, we're only allowing women and children, have no fear. Others must wait outside until space opens up, and the Red Cross reported that the violence in front is due to, quote, a small group of men who are generally not among the people seeking assistance. The area will become a safety risk zone, allowing authorities to conduct preventative searches, according to Dutch Asylum and Migration Minister announced in a recent statement. So you've got an asylum facility, an asylum camp in the Netherlands that is being flooded by individuals all over the world, some individuals from the United States seeking asylum from the United States, which is totally insane, and a bunch of guys from the Middle East who are stabbing and shooting each other in front of the facility. And so now you've got this trans person from the U.S. who is now begging to come back to the United States of America because she feels that it is unsafe at this facility. We'll get into more details on that coming up here in just a couple of minutes. But before that, I want to tell you about the Law Group here in Wilmington and remind you that when any legal questions or challenges arise, make sure you put your trust in the Law Group. Since 2003, Melissa Gott and her group of experienced attorneys have provided high-quality, affordable legal services across the eastern half of North Carolina. Whether you're facing a divorce, navigating a real estate transaction, or maybe you're in a position where you need a strong criminal defense, no matter the issue, the Law Group has your back. Their dedicated team ensures your questions are answered and issues are resolved as quickly as possible. Located in downtown Wilmington, they're just a phone call away at 910-251-6088 or visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. That's 910-251-6088 or online lawgroupnc.com. It's the Law Group. Experience and dedication you can rely on. We appreciate Melissa Gott and her team's continued support here of the Nick Craig Show. We'll grab a quick break. On the other side, we'll get into more of this just ridiculous article about this 48-year-old man who now is pretending to be a woman, seeking asylum, fleeing the United States because it's dangerous to be a trans person or whatever the hell, is now begging to come back to the United States. Total mental illness, total insanity. We'll have more on that coming up here in just a couple of minutes as the Nick Craig Show continues, streaming live on this Monday morning, YouTube, Rumble, X, Facebook, and available 24/7 wherever you get your podcasts. And a good Monday to you. Welcome back to the Nick Craig Show. Very excited coming up this Wednesday evening. We will be hosting the Nick Craig Show monthly hangout. This is available to those that support the show and get access to daily show notes over at patreon.com/Nick Craig. One of the features there for just as little as $5 or $10 a month is access to our monthly Zoom hangout. We jump on a Zoom call for a couple of hours once a month, chat about all the different interesting topics and everything going on throughout the day. That is coming up on this Wednesday, July the 29th, 7 p.m., patreon.com/Nick Craig. Look forward to seeing everybody coming up on Wednesday evening. We are talking about a pretty insane story that I caught over the weekend over at the Daily Mail, documenting and highlighting details on a 48-year-old individual known as Jane Michelle Ark, who was born a man, is a now self-described transgender woman who fled the United States after Donald Trump was reelected in 2024 and is now sitting in an asylum camp in the Netherlands, where the facility has become so dangerous that the Red Cross has pulled out any of its volunteer workers, and where now this a 48-year-old man pretending to be a woman is now claiming that this facility is too dangerous and is concerned that she will be hurt or killed and is begging to return to the United States of America. According to some of the other details in this article, ARC, the person in question, told POW News, "It is too dangerous to walk to the grocery store because of the people that live in the camp, and I'm one of them. I live here. You see these guys in yellow vests, they actually wear them because there are so many stabbings." The Red Cross said that aid volunteers feel unsafe on site, adding that violence, quote, "cannot be controlled." ARC said, "Between here and there are a bunch of Moroccans or Bulgarians or whatever that think that queer people should be beaten. I think this system where you have people just living out there are unhappy. It is not good. It's scary. It's legitimately scary. I decided that my mental health is degrading so substantially being here that I just need to get out." I mean, what the hell? I was reading this article over the weekend and was just sitting here in disbelief. You've got this individual who left the United States of America because the Trump administration is, quote unquote, erasing trans people. That's what the phrasing is. That's what the terminology is. You've heard this for a decade now. You know, it's kind of ironic in all of this, right? Trump is erasing trans people. You know, this guy first got into the Oval Office, was it January the 20th of 2017? That was almost 10 years ago. Yet somehow, and I know you think I'm crazy here, somehow trans people still exist, which I would argue if the goal of the Trump administration, both the first time and now, was to erase trans people, he's done a pretty miserable job at doing so. This is the problem with running around and making these asinine claims like many of those on the political left continue to make, because it's just not true. And of course, the larger issue here that I see is a complete and total failure of our public education system, really. And you might say, well, what does this have to do with education? You've heard this for the better part of a decade now. If Donald Trump wins, I'm leaving the United States. I got to get out of the country. The only people that would make those claims, the only individuals that would state that, are those that are so insulated in their worldview, that have no understanding of anything that happens outside the United States, that they think that's a legitimate thing that they should do. That they have received little to no knowledge whatsoever about the rest of the outside world, that they believe everywhere else is just so great and the United States is so awful. And as Jane Michelle Ark has found out, as she is now dealing with Moroccans and Bulgarians who turns out they don't like queer or trans people, and now she feels like her life is threatened. It's totally insane. But because there's no education in this country, because we don't teach anybody about the rest of the world, and all we do is teach about how awful the United States of America is, these individuals believe that they can gallivant around the rest of the world and everybody's just going to accept them. Where it turns out the vast majority of cultures throughout the rest of the world don't support somebody being queer or being trans or being gender fluid or any of these other terms. And now you've got ARC saying it's legitimately scary. My mental health is degrading. Now I just need to get out. In an attempt to restore safety, a daily shelter is set to be open at the center, giving asylum seekers a place to wait instead of sitting on the grass. Authorities are also set to add more cameras, 4 security guards, and 2 special enforcement officers. ARC transitioned from male to female in 2012 and changed the gender on her ID in 2013. But after Trump's re-election, she feared losing protections in jobs, housing, and healthcare when her passport renewal threatened to erase her legal identity. She chose to leave the United States. This is how mentally ill these people are. The process of renewing your passport is one, or getting a passport for the first time, is one that requires you to list your biological sex. Why is that important? Well, for a variety of different reasons, including the fact that that passport is used to leave and enter the United States of America. It is a very important legally binding document that goes through a lot of scrutiny and criticism to make sure that you have the ability to legally come back into the United States. And so if you were born as a biological male, making sure that that information is valid on a passport is very important. But again, just to show you the mental illness, the step of going through a passport renewal and not being able to just put some made up gender on there was a bridge so far forward that ARC had to leave the United States of America, or as the Daily Mail writes it, when her passport renewal threatened to, quote, erase her legal identity, she chose to leave the United States. She'd previously told The Guardian that fleeing the country is, quote, the dumbest thing that she has ever done, which is pretty crazy knowing some of the other things that she's done. However, she told The Guardian at the time, I did it because I was afraid for my life. I didn't do this in secret. I talked to everybody I knew. I said, I'm planning to do this wildly stupid thing. And everybody said, I don't love this for you, but there is no other option. Well, obviously, she has surrounded herself or himself with a bunch of other stupid people. Saying, I know that this is wildly stupid, and all of your friends, quote directly from this, everybody said there's no other option. There was no other option? You simply couldn't have just kept it saying male on your passport? I mean, that seems like a pretty legitimate option here. That seems like something that could have pretty easily been done. I did this because I was afraid for my life. The example that the Daily Mail here cites in their article as the reason for leaving the United States is because her passport renewal threatened to erase her legal identity. How does that make you fear for your life? That's the part I don't understand. And I think that's what I think the vast majority of people find themselves so frustrated with these conversations. You're claiming that because on a passport you couldn't claim to be a woman because you're actually a man was threatening your life? That doesn't make any sense. There's no actual threat to your life. I know that you've ginned yourself up to believe this. I'm sure your trans support groups and Reddit and all these other online forums have whipped you up into this frenzy where you believe that your life is truly being threatened. But the reality is it's not. It hasn't been, and it's not going to be. There's such an echo chamber here with these mentally ill individuals that they have legitimately brought themselves to the conclusion that they have to leave the United States because it's dangerous to be trans. It's totally nuts. It's totally crazy. Totally out of control. But these groups are just, it's a frenzy. It's a breeding ground for this mental illness. They get themselves so wrapped up in this stuff. They get themselves so ginned up and so out of control in what's going on that they go, oh my God, I gotta leave the United States. I'm fearful for my life. As a trans person in freaking San Francisco, really? San Francisco, the most lenient city practically in the United States of America. You can legally shoot up heroin in the streets of San Francisco, and it's too dangerous to be a trans person? Are you out of your mind? Yes, I believe you, in fact, are, which is in large part why we're having this discussion in the first place. We are continuing the conversation about a pretty absurd story over at the Daily Mail, in which 48-year-old Jane Michelle Ark, left the United States, is seeking asylum in the Netherlands, is living in an asylum camp now that has a bunch of Muslims and other individuals there that do not support her ability or his ability to change her gender. She is now fearful and and feels like her life is being threatened in this asylum camp, has admitted fleeing the United States is, quote, the dumbest thing that she has ever done, and is now trying to get back to the United States. In a post on Substack, Ark wrote about how she wants to return to the United States, saying in part, leaving California showed me how I cannot leave California. I thought when I left that I was growing something new here in the Netherlands, but it is time to go, long past, in fact. To return, a friend has been fundraising to pay for the cost of a new passport, which expired, and she initially declined to renew because she would be required to list her gender as male. Her friend in Jane Lane Shands wrote on Facebook to support that the support would help get her out of the asylum center and back home in California. Escalating violence against her as a trans woman and a lack of protection from U.S. authorities left her, referring to Ark, feeling that her best option was asylum in the Netherlands. Since then, Jane's partner back home has been diagnosed with cancer, prognosis good following a successful surgery, and she now wants to return to the United States to support her partner. Hold on a second. She had a partner in the United States, left her partner, who has now since been diagnosed with cancer, to claim asylum in the Netherlands? This story is totally nuts. This story is totally insane. The post on Facebook goes on. We are raising money to help her get to the consulate in Amsterdam and cover her passport fees. When she first arrived at the Immigration and Naturalization Center, IND, Ark spent her first few days in a cramped room with what she feared were bodily fluids on the walls. She considered herself lucky, as an overcrowded camp had some asylum seekers sleeping in tents outside. Residents are later moved into shared housing blocks and received a small allowance for food. Ark said that she was eventually placed into the, quote, queer block where LGBTQ asylum seekers live together. Sharing meals and conversations helped her find a sense of community. No sense of community being LGBTQ in San Francisco, right? There's no gay people in San Francisco. There's no trans people in San Francisco. Gotta move to the Netherlands and sit in an asylum camp. I'm sorry to be laughing, but this just goes to show how absurd the story is. There's a comment coming in, stop using female descriptors. I know. Unfortunately, the article is written, and trying to go through and correct every time the article says she or her would cause me to just be constantly stepping over myself and fumbling over my words. So you'll have to bear with me on that as I, again, am reading this story from the Daily Mail. Ark said that she could have moved to the Netherlands through a tech job. That would be the normal process, as I mentioned at the open, of moving somewhere else. You go through and you find a company that wants to hire you. You get a company-sponsored work visa, and you can very easily move to said country. She, again, chose not to do that. She went through the process of seeking asylum in the Netherlands. Instead, she took the drastic step of seeking asylum. She estimated 30 to 50 other transgender Americans have also sought asylum in the Netherlands, though officials do not track transgender applications. The odds of an American receiving asylum are slim, according to a professor who studies Dutch immigration told the Daily Mail. The Dutch Asylum Ministry said about 20 failed American applications were deported back to the United States in 2025. According to the university professor, said that asylum claims would only likely succeed if the United States began targeting and detaining transgender people because of their identity. The professor said, if the U.S. moves towards putting people in prison, treating them really, really bad because of their gender identity, and with no other claim added to the reason why they're in prison, that situation would definitely change. And that actually would make sense. It would be a legitimate reason for seeking asylum. But of course, as you and I are well aware, that is not happening in the United States. Trans people are not being round up in the streets and thrown in jail. Contrary to what these echo chambers tell these individuals, contrary to all of the media hype and the hysterical nature of so many of these trans individuals, none of this stuff is happening, even to the point where other nations like the Netherlands are looking at individuals' asylum claims. Again, seeking asylum. Think about what it would mean to seek asylum. You're in a war-torn country. You're being persecuted because of your religion or some other reason. You're not being persecuted in the United States as a trans person. You're not. Just because you can't use a women's locker room, just because you can't walk into a women's bathroom with young girls when you're a biological man, does not mean that you're being persecuted. I know that's what you want to think is the case. I know that's what you feel is the case, but it's not. Every regular situation unfolding in the United States with this stuff makes total logical sense. No, you can't participate in high school sports as a biological male. You can't. Sorry. That's not how the system works. You don't, just because you've decided to change your gender doesn't give you those rights. Because again, your rights stop when they start infringing on others. And this is what nobody wants to discuss on the political left. They think they've got the freedom, and in fact they do in large part, to practically do mostly whatever they want. Obviously, as it relates to U.S. law, there is nothing in U.S. law right now that says it's illegal to be a trans person. All it says is very simply, your rights don't get to infringe on others. And that is exactly the situation that takes place. Because you are claiming you are trans and you are claiming that your gender has changed, you are now infringing on the rights of actual biological women. And for the rest of America, for the vast majority of America, they say, no, this is not important. This is not the case that is going to play out in the United States. Your free expression, your free ability to do what you want does not get to infringe on other people. It just doesn't. And this is where the discussion in large part is lost by so many of these self-described trans individuals. That's where the conversation in large part completely erodes and falls apart. It's when you start infringing on other people's rights. But losing the right to list a chosen gender on a passport alone is far enough from securing asylum, according to the professor. Conservative gender policies, specifically keeping men out of women's sports, reading from the Daily Mail, were an important part of Trump's 2024 re-election campaign. And the Supreme Court's recent decision on June 30th to uphold states' ban on transgender athletes competing in girls' and women's sports. The Daily Mail has reached out to ARC for additional comment, and he had not responded back. So all in all, there's a couple of different takeaways from this. A, we have a terrible education system in the United States of America that has caused people to believe truly that the United States is an awful, oppressive society when it is not, in fact, the case. And the only way that they learn that is by going to some other countries throughout the world and seeing what actually goes on in real life. That's problem number one. Problem number two, we have got large groups of individuals that have gotten themselves so ginned up on make-believe things that aren't happening that they are taking these drastic steps like seeking asylum in the Netherlands from the United States of America because they are quote unquote transgender. Insane. Get off the internet. Touch grass. Get out and spend some time in real life before you make some of those absurd claims. I'll have the link to this article over at the Daily Mail over in the show notes at patreon.com/Nick Craig. So that is what we are tracking over there. A pretty interesting article there. The North Carolina General Assembly spending a couple of weeks back in Raleigh. We'll be keeping track of that during the week as well. We've got some comments coming in. Trump is erasing trans people and women. Next, one-legged men with hooked hands. They're running out of targeted groups. Well, of course, right? And that's what happens when you use these ridiculous phrases. And that's what I find so frustrating. And I'm not sitting here and saying that it's quote unquote easy to be trans in the United States. I don't know whether it is or isn't. I'm sure that there are some things that you have to deal with. But again, at the same time, like, you want me to take you seriously, Yet you run to the media and you run to social media and make these absurd claims that you're being erased as a person. And there's just no evidence of that. There's no proof of that taking place. And because of that, I now no longer want to interact with you. I no longer want to take you seriously because you've already been proven to be a bad actor. You've already proven that you can't act in good faith when you're just either A, you believe that this is the case, or B, you're just puppeting a bunch of garbage and nonsense that you have been essentially brainwashed into believing is the case. And I'm just not going to partake in that. If you want to claim it's hard to be a trans person in America and here's X, Y, and Z reasons why, I'm open to the discussion. I'm open to listening to you. But when you claim, oh, it's hard to be a trans person in the United States, Donald Trump is erasing me, I want nothing to do with you. Because obviously you're not operating in any sort of reality. You're not operating in any sort of fact. It's all emotion, it's all opinion, and it's based in nothing. So I have nothing to gain from interacting with you. I'm not going to debate you. I'm not going to listen to your arguments because it is starting from a place of total insanity. It's starting from a place of non-truths. And that's where we are. So interesting story to catch over the weekend. Again, I'll have the show note, or I'll have a link to it over in the notes at patreon.com/Nick Craig. All right, that's going to do it for a Monday edition. Thanks to the Law Group here in Wilmington for their continued support. Visit them online at lawgroupnc.com. You can also check out the Nick Craig Show in your favorite podcast app, and the show program live weekday mornings, 7 a.m. YouTube, Rumble, X, and Facebook, 9 p.m. weeknights on WBT Radio in Charlotte. That's going to do it for a Monday edition. We'll catch you next time right here on the Nick Craig Show.